At 3:17 a.m. on a quiet Tuesday night in Millbrook Heights, Karen Whitfield dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "There's a dangerous man outside," she whispered into the phone, her voice dripping with manufactured fear. "He's threatening me and refusing to follow community rules." What she didn't know was that the man she was about to destroy lived a double life that would shatter her perfect suburban kingdom and expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of their homeowners association. This is the true story of how one vindictive phone call unleashed a legal war that nobody saw coming. Detective Marcus Rivera had moved to Millbrook Heights for one reason: peace. After 15 years working undercover narcotics in downtown Chicago, the quiet suburban development promised the sanctuary he desperately needed. The modest two-story colonial on Maple Street wasn't much to look at, but it was his. No more drug dealers, no more midnight raids, no more looking over his shoulder. Just him, his German Shepherd Rex, and the simple dream of growing tomatoes in his backyard. He should have known peace was an illusion. Karen Whitfield ruled Millbrook Heights with the iron fist of a woman who had discovered purpose in pettiness. As president of the Millbrook Heights Homeowners Association, she wielded the community's covenants and restrictions like a weapon, striking down any deviation from her vision of suburban perfection. Lawn heights were measured with rulers. Paint colors required committee approval. Even the types of flowers residents could plant were subject to her scrutiny. When Marcus first moved in 3 months earlier, he tried to fly under Karen's radar. He kept his lawn trimmed, his trash cans hidden, and his blinds drawn. But Rex was another story. The German Shepherd was Marcus's partner from his undercover days. Trained to detect narcotics and protect his handler, Rex was also 90 pounds of muscle and intelligence that didn't take kindly to strangers approaching his territory. The first incident happened on a Sunday morning in October. Marcus was in his garage, organizing boxes from the move, when Karen appeared at the end of his driveway. She stood there in her pressed khakis and pastel polo shirt, clipboard in hand, like a suburban general surveying her domain. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying that particular tone of authority that Marcus recognized from his police work. "I need to speak with you about several violations." Rex emerged from the shadows of the garage, positioning himself between Karen and Marcus. The dog didn't growl, didn't bark, just stood there with the quiet intensity of a trained protection animal. Karen took the steps backward. "Ma'am, you're on private property," Marcus said calmly, not moving toward her. "If you have concerns, you can contact me through proper channels." Karen's face flushed red. "I am the proper channels. This is my neighborhood, and you will comply with HOA regulations. That dog needs to be registered. Your fence is 2 inches too high, and your mailbox doesn't match the approved specifications." Marcus studied her for a long moment. In his years of police work, he'd learned to read people quickly. Karen Whitfield radiated the dangerous combination of unchecked authority and deep insecurity. She was used to compliance, addicted to control, and Marcus represented something she couldn't categorize or command. "I'll review the regulations and make necessary adjustments," he said diplomatically. But Karen wasn't interested in diplomacy. Over the following weeks, she escalated her campaign against Marcus with methodical precision. Violation notices appeared on his door weekly. His trash pickup was mysteriously delayed. Neighbors began avoiding eye contact, clearly having received warnings about the problem resident on Maple Street. Marcus tried to maintain his cover. His police identity was supposed to remain secret during his administrative leave, part of the psychological recovery process his department had mandated. After his last undercover assignment went sideways, the fewer people who knew Detective Marcus Rivera lived in Millbrook Heights, the safer everyone would be. But Karen's harassment was becoming impossible to ignore. She'd taken to walking past his house multiple times a day, photographing any perceived violations with her phone. She'd even started documenting Rex's bathroom schedule, claiming the dog was creating unsanitary conditions on association property. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night in November. Marcus had been called in for a consultation on an active case, spending 14 hours helping his former team track down a drug trafficking ring. He arrived home exhausted at 2:30 a.m., parked in his driveway, and let Rex out for a quick walk around the block. They were returning to the house when Karen's porch light blazed on. She stood there in her bathrobe, phone already pressed to her ear, watching them with the focused intensity of a predator who had finally cornered her prey. "Ma'am, it's late," Marcus called out quietly, not wanting to wake the neighbors. "Is everything all right?" Karen held up one finger, signaling him to wait while she continued her phone conversation. Marcus caught fragments of her words carried. "On the cold night air, dangerous individual, threatening behavior, immediate response needed." His blood turned to ice. She was calling 911. Double quotes, "Yes, he's standing right there," Karen said, her voice loud enough to carry across the street. "He has a large aggressive dog, and he's been harassing me for weeks. I feel threatened. He refuses to follow community guidelines and becomes hostile when confronted." Marcus felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with impending conflict, but this time he was on the wrong side of it. In 15 minutes, his former colleagues would arrive at his house, responding to a domestic disturbance call. His cover would be blown, his recovery derailed, and his peaceful new life would be over. But Karen had made one critical miscalculation. She'd assumed Marcus was just another suburban resident she could intimidate and control. She had no idea that the quiet man walking his dog at 3 a.m. had spent the last decade and a half learning exactly how the system worked from the inside. As red and blue lights began to flicker in the distance, Marcus Rivera made a decision that would change both their lives forever. The game had just begun, and Karen Whitfield had chosen to play against someone who knew rules she'd never even imagined existed. The squad car pulled into Marcus's driveway at 3:17 a.m., its red and blue lights painting the quiet suburban street in harsh, rotating colors. Officer Jana Cruz stepped out first, followed by her partner, Officer Mike Chen. Marcus recognized them both from the precinct, though they'd never worked directly together. "Evening, folks," Cruz said, her hand resting casually on her duty belt. "We received a call about a disturbance." Karen rushed down from her porch, clutching her bathrobe closed against the November cold. "Officers, thank God you're here. This man has been terrorizing the neighborhood for months. He refuses to follow basic community rules, and when I try to enforce them, he becomes aggressive and threatening." Marcus stood quietly in his driveway, Rex sitting calmly at his side. Years of police work had taught him the power of silence, and right now, Karen's frantic energy was doing his work for him. "Sir, can you tell us your side of the story?" Chen asked, pulling out his notebook. Before Marcus could respond, Karen interrupted. "He's got a vicious dog that he lets run wild. Look at that thing. It's huge, and he parks that motorcycle in his driveway like he thinks he's above the association rules. I've tried to work with him, but he just ignores everything I say." Cruz studied Marcus more carefully, something nagging at her memory. "Sir, have we met before?" This was the moment Marcus had been dreading. He could feel his carefully constructed new life teetering on the edge of collapse. But Karen's desperation was about to hand him an unexpected gift. "Officers, I want him arrested," Karen declared, pointing dramatically at Marcus. "He's been harassing me, intimidating me. I have documentation of every violation, every threatening encounter." "Ma'am, what specifically has he threatened you with?" Chen asked, pen poised over his notebook. Karen faltered for a moment. "Well, his dog. The way he looks at me when I try to talk to him. It's menacing, threatening." Cruz exchanged a glance with her partner. "Ma'am, looking at someone isn't a crime. Has he actually threatened you verbally or physically?" "He doesn't have to say anything." Karen's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "The intimidation is obvious. That dog is trained to attack. I can tell just by looking at it." That's when Marcus made his move, slowly, deliberately. He reached into his back pocket and withdrew his leather badge wallet. The shield caught the streetlight as he held it up for the officers to see. Detective Marcus Rivera, Narcotics Division. He said quietly, "I'm currently on administrative leave." The effect was immediate and devastating. Cruz's eyes widened in recognition and Chen lowered his notebook. But it was Karen's reaction that would haunt Marcus for weeks afterward. The color drained from her face as if someone had pulled a plug, and she took 3 stumbling steps backward. You're a cop," she whispered. "Mom, did you just file a false police report?" Cruz asked, her tone shifting from neutral to suspicious. "I know. I didn't know." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "He never told me he was police. How was I supposed to know?" Chen flipped to a fresh page in his notebook. "Ma'am, what specifically did Detective Rivera do tonight that caused you to call 911? The question hung in the cold air like a challenge. Karen looked around desperately, as if the perfect answer might be hiding in the shadows of the manicured neighborhood. "He was walking that dog at 3 a.m., she said finally. That's not normal behavior." Cruz looked at Marcus, then back at Karen. "Ma'am, walking a dog isn't illegal, regardless of the time. But the association rules clearly state HOA violations aren't criminal matters." Chen interrupted. "They're civil disputes." Marcus watched Karen's world crumble in real time. The woman who had ruled Millbrook Heights through intimidation and manufactured authority was learning the difference between actual legal power and the petty tyranny of suburban bureaucracy. After the officers left, Marcus stood in his driveway for a long time, processing what had just happened. Karen had retreated to her house, but he could see her silhouette in the window. Watching him, the dynamic between them had shifted fundamentally. She now knew exactly who she'd been trying to intimidate, and the knowledge terrified her. But Marcus's relief was short-lived. The next morning brought a certified letter from the law offices of Pemberton. Hayes and Associates. Karen had hired lawyers. The letter was a masterpiece of legal intimidation, alleging harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and violation of HOA covenants. It demanded Marcus cease all threatening behavior, remove his non-compliant mailbox, and pay $5,000 in damages for Karen's emotional trauma. Marcus read the letter twice, his cop instincts kicking into high gear. This wasn't about HOA violations anymore. This was about power and revenge. Karen had been humiliated in front of the police, and now she was escalating the legal warfare. He called his union representative, Detective Sarah Martinez, who had been handling his administrative leave paperwork. "Marcus, what the hell did you do out there in suburbia?" Sarah asked after reviewing the letter. "I walked my dog and didn't bow down to the neighborhood dictator," Marcus replied. "Now she's trying to destroy my life through the courts. This is serious. A harassment lawsuit could affect your reinstatement. The department doesn't need more bad publicity." That afternoon, Marcus hired his own attorney, David Park, a former prosecutor who specialized in defending police officers in civil suits. Park read through Karen's complaint with the dispassionate efficiency of someone who'd seen it all before. "She's fishing," Park concluded. "But fishing expeditions can still catch something. If we're not careful, we need to document everything. Every interaction, every piece of harassment, every attempt at intimidation." "I've been keeping records," Marcus said, pulling out a thick folder. Photos, dates, witness statements from neighbors who've seen her behavior. Park's eyebrows rose as he flipped through Marcus's. "Documentation, you've been thorough, but there's something else we need to consider. Why is she so desperate to get rid of you? In my experience, this level of obsession usually has a deeper motivation." That night, Marcus began his own investigation. Using techniques learned from 15 years of police work, he started digging into Karen Whitfield's background and her role in the homeowners association. What he discovered would change everything. The Millbrook Heights HOA controlled a budget of over $2 million annually, funded by mandatory fees from 800 homeowners. Karen had been president for 6 years, during which time the association had paid out hundreds of thousands of dollars to contractors for maintenance and improvements. That seemed to have little visible impact. More interesting were the property records. In the past 3 years, 5 homes in the neighborhood had been foreclosed due to unpaid HOA fees and fines. All 5 had been purchased by a shell company called Millbrook Investment Properties. And according to state incorporation records, the registered agent for Millbrook Investment Properties was Karen Whitfield's husband, Robert. Marcus leaned back in his chair, pieces of a larger puzzle falling into place. Karen wasn't just a power-hungry HOA president. She was potentially running a sophisticated fraud scheme, using trumped-up violations and excessive fines to force homeowners into foreclosure, then having her husband's company buy the properties at below-market prices. A detective who asked too many questions and couldn't be intimidated represented an existential threat to their operation. No wonder Karen was so desperate to get rid of him. As Marcus compiled his evidence, he felt the familiar thrill of a case coming together. But this time, he wasn't just investigating. He was the target, and Karen Whitfield was about to learn that declaring war on a detective was the biggest mistake of her life. The subpoenas would start flying within the week. 6 months later, the Millbrook County Courthouse buzzed with unusual energy. The case of Whitfield v. Rivera had attracted attention far beyond the typical HOA dispute, drawing local news crews and curious neighbors who packed the gallery like spectators at a boxing match. Karen Whitfield sat at the plaintiff's table with her attorney, Richard Pemberton, a silver-haired veteran of civil litigation who commanded $500 an hour and wore his arrogance like expensive cologne. Karen had transformed herself for court, trading her suburban uniform of polo shirts and khakis for a conservative navy suit. That screamed respectable victim. At the defense table, Marcus Rivera sat beside his attorney David Park, looking calm and professional in his best suit. Behind them, several of Marcus's colleagues from the police department filled the front row, a show of solidarity that hadn't gone unnoticed by the plaintiff's side. Judge Patricia Hendricks called the court to order, her sharp eyes surveying the packed courtroom. A former prosecutor herself, Judge Hendricks had a reputation for cutting through legal theatrics to get to the truth. "Mr. Pemberton, you may present your opening statement," she said. Pemberton rose with theatrical flourish, adjusting his tie. As he approached the jury box, "Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about power and intimidation. My client, Karen Whitfield, is a dedicated public servant who volunteers her time to maintain the quality of life in her neighborhood. For her efforts, she has been subjected to months of harassment, intimidation, and emotional distress by the defendant, who has used his position as a police officer to evade accountability for his actions." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but Park's steady hand on his arm kept him seated. "The evidence will show," Pemberton continued, "that Detective Rivera has systematically violated community standards, intimidated residents, and created a hostile environment in what was once a peaceful neighborhood. We're not asking for much, just enough compensation to help Mrs. Whitfield recover from the trauma she's endured, and an injunction to prevent further harassment." Park's opening was markedly different in tone. He stood calmly, making eye contact with each juror before speaking. "This case isn't about HOA violations or hurt feelings," he said simply. "It's about a woman who thought she could use the legal system to destroy a man's career because he wouldn't bend to her will. The evidence will show that Karen Whitfield has waged a campaign of harassment against my client from the day he moved to Millbrook Heights, culminating in filing a false police report at 3 a.m. when her intimidation tactics failed. The first day of testimony established the basic facts. Karen took the stand, describing herself as a conscientious community leader who only wanted residents to follow reasonable rules. Detective Rivera's attitude was hostile from our very first interaction, she testified, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. When I approached him about simple compliance issues, he became defensive and aggressive. That dog of his was clearly trained to intimidate people. Under cross-examination, Park systematically dismantled Karen's narrative. "Mrs. Whitfield, how many violation notices did you send to Detective Rivera in his first 3 months of residency?" I don't recall the exact number. Park handed her a stack of papers. 17 notices in 12 weeks. That's more than one per week. Do you send violation notices to other residents? With this frequency, Karen's face reddened. Only when necessary. And how many times did you walk past Detective Rivers' house each day? I don't monitor my own movements. Park produced photographs taken by Marcus's security cameras. These timestamps show you passed his house between 4 and 8 times. Daily. Would you call that normal behavior? I was conducting legitimate HOA business. The second day brought Marcus to the stand. His testimony was calm and methodical, describing each interaction with Karen and his attempts to avoid confrontation. I moved to Millbrook Heights for peace, he said. I'd spent 15 years in undercover narcotics work, and I needed a quiet place to recover. Mrs. Whitfield made that impossible. Pemberton's cross-examination was aggressive, trying to paint Marcus as a bully hiding behind his badge. Isn't it true, Detective Rivera, that you used your police credentials to intimidate my client? No, sir. I never revealed my profession until the night she called 911. But you knew the effect it would have when you showed your badge to those officers. I showed my badge to prevent being arrested on false charges. False charges. Mrs. Whitfield called police because she felt threatened. Marcus looked directly at the jury. Mr. Pemberton, your client called 911 at 3 a.m. and reported a dangerous man threatening her. The responding officers found me standing quietly in my own driveway with my dog. If that constitutes a threat, then every dog owner in America is a criminal. The courtroom erupted in murmurs, and Judge Hendricks gavelled for order. But it was the third day that changed everything. Park called Robert Whitfield, Karen's husband, as a witness. Mr. Whitfield, are you familiar with a company called Millbrook Investment Properties? Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I may have heard of it, according to state records. You're listed as the registered agent for this company. Did you forget? Yes. I handle some paperwork for them. Park produced property records. This company has purchased 5 foreclosed homes in Millbrook Heights over the past 3 years, all of which were foreclosed due to unpaid HOA fees. Isn't that correct? Pemberton shot to his feet. Objection. Relevance. Your Honor, this goes to the plaintiff's motivation for targeting my client. Park replied. Judge Hendricks leaned forward. I'll allow it, but get to the point quickly, Mr. Park. Mr. Whitfield, what's the average profit margin on these property flips? I wouldn't know. Park handed him financial documents. According to these records, your company has made over $400. Zero in profit from homes that were foreclosed due to HOA violations pursued by your wife. Don't you find that coincidental? The courtroom fell silent. Even Karen's face had gone pale as she realized where this was heading. Your Honor, Park continued, we have evidence that the plaintiff has been using her position as HOA president to generate foreclosures that directly benefit her family financially. Detective Rivers' presence in the neighborhood threatened this scheme because he couldn't be intimidated like other residents. Pemberton was on his feet again. Objection. This is a harassment case, not a fraud investigation. But the damage was done. The jury had heard enough to understand that Karen's lawsuit wasn't about harassment. It was about silencing someone who posed a threat to a lucrative operation. Judge Hendricks recessed court for the day, but as spectators filed out, everyone knew the case had taken a dramatic turn. Karen sat at the plaintiff's table, staring at her hands, while her husband whispered urgently in Pemberton's ear in the hallway. Local news reporter Jennifer Walsh cornered Park for a comment. Mr. Park, are you alleging that Mrs. Whitfield has been running a fraud scheme through the HOA? Park smiled grimly. I'm alleging that someone who files false police reports and brings frivolous lawsuits might not be the pillar of community virtue she claims to be. As the courthouse emptied, Marcus felt a familiar sensation, the pieces of a case coming together. The truth emerging from layers of deception and manipulation, but unlike his police work, this time he was fighting for his own life and reputation. Tomorrow would bring the verdict, but tonight, Karen Whitfield would be making some very difficult phone calls. The jury filed back into the courtroom after 2 hours of deliberation, their faces revealing nothing. Judge Hendricks surveyed the packed gallery one final time before calling for order. As the jury reached a verdict, the foreman, a retired teacher named William Martinez, stood slowly. "We have, Your Honor." Karen Whitfield gripped her attorney's arm, her knuckles white against the dark fabric of his suit. Across the aisle, Marcus Rivera sat motionless, years of police work having taught him to control his emotions in crucial moments. In the matter of Whitfield versus Rivera, we find in favor of the defendant, Martinez announced. "We award no damages to the plaintiff." The courtroom erupted. Karen's face crumpled as if she'd been physically struck, while Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. But Judge Hendricks wasn't finished. Furthermore, she said, her voice cutting through the noise, based on evidence presented during this trial, "I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential fraud charges related to the Millbrook Heights Homeowners Association." Pemberton was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, my client was not on trial for fraud." "No, Mr. Pemberton, but fraud was certainly on trial in my courtroom," Judge Hendricks replied coldly. "The evidence suggests a pattern of using HOA violations to force foreclosures for financial gain that warrants investigation." As the judge's gavel fell with finality, Karen Whitfield's world collapsed completely. The woman who had ruled her suburban kingdom through fear and intimidation was now facing the possibility of criminal charges. But the real twist was yet to come. 3 weeks later, Marcus Rivera sat in District Attorney Jennifer Cole's office, reviewing documents that would have made his narcotics cases look simple by comparison. "Detective Rivera, we've been investigating the Millbrook Heights HOA for 2 weeks now, and what we found is staggering," Cole said, sliding a thick folder across her desk. "This wasn't just about property flips. Mrs. Whitfield and her husband were operating a comprehensive fraud scheme." Marcus opened the folder, his trained eye quickly scanning financial records, contracts, and bank statements. They were inflating maintenance costs, creating fake vendor invoices, and skimming money from the association's reserve fund. Cole continued, "Over 6 years, they embezzled nearly $800,000 from homeowner fees. How did they get away with it for so long?" Marcus asked. "Simple. Anyone who asked too many questions got buried in violation notices and harassment until they either shut up or moved away. You were just the first person who couldn't be intimidated." The Assistant District Attorney, David Chen, leaned forward. "There's more. We've identified 12 other homeowners who were targeted with excessive fines and violations after asking questions about association finances. The Whitfields used the HOA as their personal ATM, and Karen's position as president gave her the power to silence anyone who got suspicious." Marcus felt a familiar satisfaction, the same feeling he got when a long investigation finally came together. But this victory belonged to more than just him. "What happens now?" he asked. "Karen Whitfield has been arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy," Cole replied. "Robert Whitfield is cooperating in exchange for reduced charges, and we're working with the Homeowners Association to recover as much of the stolen money as possible." 6 months later, Marcus Rivera stood in his backyard, tending to the tomato garden he'd always dreamed of. Rex lounged in the shade nearby, no longer the intimidating presence Karen had feared, just a retired police dog enjoying his golden years. The Millbrook Heights neighborhood had changed dramatically. A new HOA board had been elected, led by neighbors who prioritized transparency over tyranny. Property values had actually increased once word spread that the corrupt leadership had been removed. Karen Whitfield received a sentence of 4 years in prison and was ordered to pay full restitution to the Homeowners Association. Her husband received probation and community service for his cooperation with prosecutors. But perhaps the most satisfying twist came in the form of a phone call Marcus received. On a sunny Tuesday morning in September, "Detective Rivera, this is Captain Walsh from Internal Affairs. Your administrative leave has been officially concluded. We'd like you to consider heading up our new white-collar crime unit. Seems you have a talent for uncovering financial fraud." Marcus smiled, looking out at his perfectly imperfect suburban street where children played on lawns that were no longer measured with rulers, where mailboxes came in different colors, and where neighbors talked to each other instead of filing violation reports. "Captain, I'd be honored," he said. "Sometimes justice comes in unexpected forms. Sometimes the person who tries to destroy your peace ends up giving you a new purpose. And sometimes, the best way to defeat a bully is simply to refuse to be bullied." As Marcus watched Rex chase a butterfly through the garden, he reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He moved to Millbrook Heights looking for quiet retirement from his police career, only to stumble into the biggest fraud case of his life right in his own backyard. Karen Whitfield's 3 a.m. phone call had been intended to destroy him. Instead, it had exposed her own crimes and saved hundreds of families from financial exploitation. The whole dictator, who thought she was above the law, had learned that justice has a way of finding everyone, even in the most unlikely places. The moral of the story was simple: never underestimate the quiet neighbor who just wants to be left alone, because sometimes that quiet neighbor is exactly the person who has the skills and determination to bring down your house of cards. And in Millbrook Heights, where Karen Whitfield once ruled through fear and intimidation, children now played freely in yards where flowers grew in whatever colors their families chose, where dogs walked at all hours without persecution, and where neighbors had learned that community meant cooperation, not control. The badge Marcus had shown that cold November night hadn't just saved him from false arrest. It had saved an entire neighborhood from years of continued exploitation. Sometimes being a cop means more than just carrying a gun and making arrests. Sometimes it means standing up to bullies, no matter what form they take, even when they come disguised as concerned homeowner association presidents with clipboards and manufactured authority. Have you ever dealt with an abusive HOA or neighborhood bully? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true crime legal dramas that prove justice can come from the most unexpected places. Sometimes the person trying to destroy your peace is actually paving the way for their own downfall.